people don't realize this. Amazon, do you know how much VC Amazon raised?
Not much.
14 million in their entire history.
Welcome to the World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Jesse Pujji. Jesse is the founder and CEO of Gateway X, a venture studio focused on D2C brands. And previously, he was the co-founder and CEO of Ampush, which was our great digital marketing firm. Jesse, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thanks, Auren. I'm excited to be doing this.
Now, my experience is if you hire like a software engineer at random from any successful tech company, you're going to end up with a pretty good software engineer. But if you hire a marketer at random, you don't really know what you're going to get. Is that your experience? And if so, like, can you give us some ideas about how to better hire a marketing person?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. You know, it's true. And it was my experience 10 or 12 years ago. You know, I am not a digital marketer by background. I mean, if you were to ask me back then, I was on Wall Street. I worked at Goldman Sachs. And prior to that, I worked at McKinsey. And so hit these two very fancy companies right out of college. And someone said, you know, you're good with numbers and data. Jesse, go look at digital marketing. And we built a company, you know, started kind of getting it going and put a job rec out and said, you know, we want a search marketer, or we want a Facebook marketer.
Yeah.
And I remember this like it was yesterday. There was a woman who had done search marketing at a pretty well-known company, you know, big budgets, all the whole nine. And you know, I came from Wall Street, and my version of I started asking her math questions in the interview. Just you know, what I would call the stoichiometry of digital marketing. I have this CPM and this CTR. What would my CPC be?
Yeah.
And she looked at me. She goes, "Oh, do I need math for this job?" And I go, "What? What do you?" You know, I stood up. I said, "Thanks for coming in." And you know, and that was our experience when we were building Ampush from scratch. And you know the Ampush story a little bit, but for people listening, we were one of the first companies to crack the code on direct response on Facebook. And we thought it was going to be a SaaS business. We built a software platform. We started pitching people and they said, I don't need a software. I don't know how to do this. So can you guys do it? And then they really wanted services and we were bootstrapped. And so, you know, what do you do when you're bootstrapped? Your customer asks for something, you say, sure, I'll get you some services, no worries. But then we couldn't hire anyone. And it was like shocking to us. And so the way we answered the question that you asked at the beginning was we just hired ex-bankers, ex-consultants. We hired out of college.
Real smart people who are quantitative in some way.
Yeah, and today I still say, like, I can't, you know, the younger people we now can teach rigor to, but in general, if someone has a rigorous background, that works. That's something I prefer to have. And then I can teach you the creativity. I can teach you, you know, some of the resourcefulness things that come along with growth marketing. But for whatever reason, I think as the platforms have gotten better, it becomes worse. You know, search marketers were bad for the most part because Google is such an easy platform to use and to make effective. Yeah. And then Facebook over time has gotten so easy that, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day. And so you get people who are Facebook marketers and they really aren't rigorous. They aren't analytical. It's a big industry problem. And a lot of the stuff I've been spending time on Gateway X is ways of solving that problem. So
one of the interesting things is that, like, in some ways, marketing is very, very science driven, whereas like engineering is actually a lot more art. Yeah. And you would think it'd be the opposite. Like if someone didn't know about either of those two things, they would actually say, oh, it's the opposite. And just the way you manage people, the way you manage, you know, there's this whole funnel in marketing. It's very, very numbers driven. And engineering is a lot more hard to put numbers to things that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and what ultimately, as you know, Ampush would go into some of the best companies and say, we're going to still be better than the way you're doing marketing. And then we would, and we'd even bet our fees on it, you know, and that was a part of what we learned from the Red Ventures guys. And the way we got to do that was really actually a very similar system to an engineering agile process. You know, we got very good at running what we called marketing sprints, and those sprints would get planned just like an engineering sprint would get planned. There would be initiatives that would be prioritized based on, you know, some sort of framework like ICE or, you know, some kind of bang for buck. And, you know, today Facebook and a lot of these platforms, landing page testing, there is a lot of creativity actually and ideas around it. But if you just have that creativity and you don't have a rigorous framework that it lives inside of, you're eventually going to, get in trouble and not have things be successful. And I think, and Twitter and stuff, there's it's almost commonly accepted that Facebook is just a volatile thing you can't tame. And I reject that. And most people from Ampush reject that wholeheartedly, that it's volatile. The stock market's volatile. Boeing making jets, I'm sure, is volatile, but they found some way to create stability inside of that process. And that's a big part of how we think about digital marketing. But you're absolutely right that there's a total demand for these people. There's not enough supply for them in the market, and like we're building businesses around that problem right now.
You mentioned Red Ventures, like it's to me they're one of the most impressive companies that almost no one's heard about. Like, give us a little bit of background into them.
Yeah, what I've been telling people now is like the way the world worships Warren Buffett today, or maybe Barry Diller or something, is sort of what in 10 years, maybe more, that Rick Elias, the founder of Red Ventures, is going to get worshipped. And like, I'm an early devotee and friend, and he's a mentee. Their story is super cool. Rick and Dan, the founders, who I count both as friends, they grew up in Sendint in the late 90s. So, they worked at GE, they went to good colleges. And Sendint, you probably know this, some younger people won't know.
It's got the travel agencies and everything.
Yeah, it had Travelocity, it had all these sort of DR, it had the famously the coupon books. And then they both left. They said, let's start a company. And they chose Charlotte somewhat out of a hat. Dan has some ties there. And they said, let's go do direct marketing on the internet. But that wasn't really a thing in the year 2000. I mean, you got to go. It was before search even existed.
Yep.
And, in their words, not mine, 5 years later, they had built a shitty digital marketing agency. And it was project-based and no one really knew how it worked. And they just got out of it and they hated it. And around that time, Google Search launched. And, some people were starting agencies, some people were starting lead gen businesses. They had a client in DirecTV, and they came up with a really creative idea. They said, DirecTV was out looking for dealers, these resellers in local markets. Hey, go sell satellites at the mall.
Yeah.
And between the two of them, they had a great idea. I was like, make us a reseller. And DirecTV's like, okay, great. What region would you like? And they said, well, there's this new thing called the internet. We'll take that region, please. And at the time, DirecTV didn't know better. And they said, well, sure. And so they built, SEO, brand search. They built, paid brand search. And they started generating a ton of traffic for DirecTV subs. Now, another really crazy smart thing they did was they added on the entirety of the sale process. So they had the call centers. They had it completely vertically integrated, other than, as they would say, rolling trucks. So they would get the entire thing done, and they got paid like an affiliate or like a reseller. Yeah. And they became 10 times better than DirecTV at doing this themselves. And they had smart, things that now we take for granted, but at that time didn't exist. Like whatever you browse at on the site, they had a million different 800 numbers. So my browsing history and yours, once we came from the site onto the phone, the call rep would know I looked at the NFL and HBO and you looked at Cinemax and soccer, and they would sell us differently. Yep. And so they basically built this massively profitable, totally bootstrapped business. They started doing that for every major product.
Because they never really took, they took a couple people.
They took private equity later on from, all secondary type stuff. But they, it was incredibly data driven, incredibly intense culture, but also wonderful, like very nice and wonderful people. And they started doing it, with American Express and Verizon and anything that had that kind of same purchase funnel. So they built up this sort of, I wouldn't even call it an agency. It was like a tech enabled services type play. And they got so good at SEO and some of these other things that as they started kind of reaching the end of growth for that first business, they bought a stake in us, and they said, well, maybe we can make Ampush the direct, Red Ventures of DirecTV. So that was kind of what they did when they invested in us. But they made a bunch of bets. But one of the bets they made was, what if we just buy publishers and use our prowess to kind of improve publishers? And they were buying businesses and tripling their profits in less than a year.
Wow.
To the point where they started buying huge companies like Bankrate and CNET. And so now, the original business is still a big business, but it's a tiny part of this massive empire of publishers that use that same kind of approach. They own Healthline, they own CNET, they own Bankrate. And it's just a really cool, group of people and cool company. And I think we'll continue to do amazing things.
Now, walk us through some of the more misunderstood things about the D2C business model.
Yeah, I think I think I can talk about this now. A joke I used to say in private was there's a blog post I'll never write called First Mover Disadvantage. And if you look at, I think one of the biggest things is people talk, I think brand is important.
Yep.
I think good products are important, but I'm a little bit of a hammer looking at a nail, but the blog post that I won't ever write is if you look at some of the big categories like mattresses or meal kits or the makeup boxes, the first mover in each of those spaces, Birchbox, Casper, Blue Apron, all of them are struggling or gone today. And if you look at the second mover in each of the spaces, Purple Mattress, HelloFresh, and Ipsy, they're all billion-dollar businesses. And so I think one of the biggest...
And it's funny because the first ones are probably way more well known, right?
But that's the first mover disadvantage, which is they got all their growth organically. And Katya Beauchamp's a close friend of mine, this founder, so she agrees with this. They never built the rigor, the same thing we're talking about, the mathematical and scientific rigor of customer acquisition growth, data oriented. Meanwhile, HelloFresh is coming out of Rocket Internet. I mean, they're crazy Germans building this big business. The Ipsy got, so all the other companies that came as a second mover built that rigor. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstood things is that you can actually win, and I think most of the time will win if you build a really robust data-driven marketing and kind of not just marketing, but marketing retention, like all the piece of data-driven business being at the core of what you're doing in D2C. So I think that's one. I think another one is like maybe at this point people have figured it out. Like there's a lot of money to be made in the space, but not necessarily from a venture perspective. And it was way over invested in for venture. Even like you see it today, like, the eyeglass company, I'm forgetting their name right now.
Warby Parker.
Yeah, Warby Parker. Their market cap is less than invested capital. And yet I think there's so many businesses that generate a significant amount of EBITDA. I came across this company called Superfoods Company, or there's Golden Hippo. They're both supplements businesses, both like have 8 to 9 figures in EBITDA.
Wow.
You never heard of them. And they're huge direct marketing, kind of direct scale businesses. So I think there's a lot paid attention again to the Warbies and the Allbirds, and there was a big hoo-ha about that stuff. And there's plenty of.
But if you can get to 9-figure EBITDA, that does seem like there is a venture business there. That could be a venture scale business.
Incidentally, the funny thing about those types of companies, A, I don't know how long it took them to get there, maybe 10 or 12 years, but B, if you gave them venture, they'd probably screw it up. Like part of what makes them a 9-figure EBITDA is the rigor.
Is that they're more disciplined about everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the problem with the selling physical goods, these D2C brands that sell physical goods, is that you have to pay for them often before you sell them, or there's some amount of money that you have to raise. So you can't just like completely bootstrap it. Or do you disagree?
We launched a brand out of Gateway X, and I'm obviously an experienced founder, so this wouldn't work for everyone. But we got terms from a manufacturer. We lined up Settle, which is an awesome one of these finance companies that will finance your media and your inventory. And then we had a negative cash. We have a negative cash cycle.
Yeah.
And Amazon famously, I'll use as an example, and people don't realize this. Amazon, do you know how much VC Amazon raised?
Not much.
14 million in their entire history. And the reason Jeff Bezos was able to do that was because he took cash when you closed the deal, and he paid his suppliers late.
Yep.
And so I think there's much more to be said, especially now. I mean, maybe 5-10 years ago that was harder, but especially now, I think you can use financing.
You don't have to take inventory immediately. You can do some things. You could maybe skimp on like, okay, it's not going to get you one day later type of thing.
I think there's lots of ways to be resourceful around it that can make it much easier to get going and get things happening. And I think, look, we probably put in the brand we launched, it's doing about $3 million in sales. It's break even. It's about a year old. And we put $300,000-$400,000 into it. So it's not nothing for sure.
Yeah.
And then we borrowed
not
a bunch
venture
of
scale.
stuff. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't want it to be either,
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. What do you think some of the categories of D2C that are going to do well in the next 5 years? Is it just looking at things that are already working and now just being like the second, third mover?
I think there's versions of that. I think there's a lot of still niche to win areas. Some of the things I looked at when we launched this brand that we launched was high AOVs or AOVs that can get high with multiple SKUs.
And for the people who don't know, what's an AOV?
Sorry, average order value, right? So as a general premise, like I think if you're going to launch a business that's going to be heavily reliant on Facebook ads, you should plan around a minimum of a $50 CAC.
Yep.
That's not a hard and fast rule. There are plenty of violations of that rule, but that's what I would plan around. And so
that means you want to have at least like $100 item type of thing.
Yeah, or something that within maybe 60 days or whatever can get to something like that, right? Like I think recurring revenue is really valuable.
Yeah.
I think having a niche or an angle that makes a ton of sense, that has a marketing oriented, like this is not the one we did, but one on my list is literally a premium supplement for South Asian men in the US. Uh-huh. It's the highest earning diaspora. Yep. We all have the same issues. We all have
heart issues.
We all have low D3. Like you could design the supplement for them and say, I even have a name for it. It's Musti. Musti means like sparkles in Hindi, and it's like this like really good. And I charge you $120 a month for it.
I love this business.
$120 for it, and my cost would be $10 or maybe $15 shipping it to you. But now you have a niche that I think can work. So I think that's a category. I think there's
so part of it is also like defining the niche or something. It's not just moisturizer for women, but it might be for a specific type of woman or something like that. And really, really marketing to that person.
Yeah, skincare for Black people, or like I think there's a lot of cross sections of interesting areas that, again, Walgreens can't stock Musti. It just would never make mathematical sense. But it's like what should be on the internet and what should get delivered in that way. I think there's still a ton of room on there. I think a couple other when we were kids, the way someone started a small business and sold something, they just opened up a little shop in their retail mall. I think that people don't realize how much that's happening with Shopify stores. Mm-hmm. One of the businesses we started was selling software to Shopify stores. And I mean, the types of businesses I ran into, they just blew my mind. There was one selling reptiles, and it had special cages for reptiles. There was one selling cutouts for sewing. And so there's like the bigger opportunities, which I think
I saw one that sells human brains.
So I think there must be much venture scale stuff. Probably not. I think there can be a ton of 8 and 9 figure EBITDA businesses that are sort of more bootstrappy. But then I think there's going to be billions of value created for literally $1 million stores that make $300,000 a year and are, a huge number of those stores out there. So I'm still pretty bullish on
somehow could scale like $1,000 million stores or something.
Well, that's like what Keith Rabois is doing with Open Store, and there's a handful of people aggregating those up. I think those are businesses where the right people running them, they're going to be very, very successful. But they're tough businesses to run because you're doing a ton of M&A and so on and so forth.
But you could potentially even start a bunch of them.
Absolutely, yeah. We plan on. I mean, our plan is to really. We started one, and we're going to go through all the hard parts of starting one. And kind of rebuild what I call the ambush culture inside of but we're actually owning the brand ourselves versus doing it for someone else. We may start a couple others or kind of expand that. But then we think in the next 3 years, there's going to be tons. We're already seeing them, tons of people literally handing businesses for free, away because they're not going to make a return on them, and they just need to get out of them. And we'll be really well positioned to start to build a bigger portfolio that we can operate.
Like kind of a constellation software for these D2C businesses.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you think there's like some sort of natural level of spending on these direct to consumer businesses that will settle into, or do you think it's always kind of ebb and flow where you're going to buy some from Macy's, you get some from Amazon, you go to Safeway, and then, in some case you go direct?
I don't know. I'd say, well, I'll give you a couple answers. I would say something like, I think half of retail will end up in e-com. But I think what's really going to happen is the experience as we know it today is going to totally change. Like, I'm sure the history of the shopping mall. Like the shopping mall was invented when suburbs became a thing, right? Yep. And so suburbs, by the way, are a uniquely American invention. People from around the world go, oh, that's kind of such a. But this real estate entrepreneur said, well, what's the experience if you live in a house that's not near the city? Oh, let's go to shopping mall. I think a bunch of real estate entrepreneurs are going to reinvent, you probably with the same space. Like what should be the experience? There's certain experiential things I want. I can take my kids to an event, whatever. I don't need to walk into a store and see all the inventory. What I really need is I need to walk into a place,
Try some things out,
get a couple things out, and then like it should be waiting for me at home when I get home.
Yep.
And so what I really think is going to happen is like similar to how, there's a bunch of categories today that we don't even think of as online or offline. That's what it's not going to be e-commerce. It's just going to be like the way it all kind of comes together.
One of the things that it is hard to like in the times that I do a lot of D2C myself, I buy a lot of random things off of like some Facebook ad or Twitter ad or something. And, I get a good experience. Then the product is nice, but then they're not really always so great about building the relationship with me. And then getting me to buy the next product or anything like that. I feel like I've kind of sometimes even forget about the brand. It seems like it's a lot of work to build that relationship with the consumer. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, my best answer for it is it's super early innings. Like, you remember when we first had Netflix streaming and it was like kind of sucked and didn't really work that well, and half the time would kind of crap out. And today it's like, man, the device shows up, they optimize it, they figure out your internet connection. Like, I just like, you think of even like Stitch Fixes or some of these other folks, and I feel like they're all just in the really early innings of what this experience will ultimately. They're all going to get better and better and better. And not to mention companies like Shopify and all this, like the e-com tech stack, the data world, all these things are just going to improve dramatically. And then I do think there's going to be a reasonable amount of aggregation or consolidation that takes place in the next 5-6 years.
Because like each of these brands, like, let's say some brand is doing 10, 20 million in revenue, like they can only invest so much on each of the pieces of stack. But if you have, if you're controlling 10 of those brands, now you can make much bigger investments.
I think that's right. Yeah. And again, it's going to come to those, like another great example of a company with an incredible culture. They're very public about it. Is True Classics. Have you heard of this?
No.
So, if you or me we get pitched all the time by founders or angel invest. It's 2019 and they go, we're going to sell better t-shirts to people. We'd be like, what are you talking about? No way. And they're very public about they're like a 300 million revenue business, profitable, growing EBITDA, and it's 4 years in.
Wow.
And it's all like rigor and customer acquisition. Like, it's run by Israeli. It's like they don't fuck around, right? Like, it's a very clear approach. And by the way, the product is really good, but it's an unbelievable story that's like,
and it's just t-shirts.
I mean, now it's more than t-shirts, but it started as like better fitted. If you've got dad bod, they make you look a little different. They're comfortable, they're cheap. But they sell you 6-packs and 8-packs, and but you just go to their site, you'll see in a second why they win. To your point, I mean, they build a relationship, but they have every little knick-knack of, okay, there's a timer at the top. Oh, you bought this. Here's one other thing you probably would like. Like, they've almost have like an Amazon level of sophistication within a very small site. And so it kind of like the execution of this stuff is just so critical. And I think, by the way, that's a big thing in startup land that just, to me, is still not talked about enough. When I did my Goldman Sachs training, on the first day, the first minute, they say, we are in a hyper competitive, highly commoditized business. That's the first thing they say.
Yeah.
Now let's go win. And here's how we do it. We hire the best. That's like that's how Red Ventures acts. That's how Ampush acts. That's how these e-com guys need to act, in my opinion.
Right. And venture funded startups are the exact opposite. They're like, we're trying to build something that's a monopoly. It's not competitive. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. Right.
We have to build the moat. And look, there's obviously examples of that, like Facebook/Meta or Google. But honestly, it's 1% of the company, 1/10% of the companies that actually do that. And even most SaaS companies have trouble with that, right? And so I think they could do a much more balanced version of like the Goldman Sachs mantra inside of it. And for e-com and D2C, that's it. There really is no long-term defensibility inherent in any of those businesses.
One of the things, like, I think sometimes people take the wrong lesson from Amazon when they're thinking about shopping. Amazon has this huge benefit where you keep going back there all the time.
Yeah.
And it's such a brand. And often for many people when they're shopping, it's the search bar that they use for shopping. Totally. So they don't have to optimize things. They don't have to build a relationship. They literally do a terrible job building a relationship with consumer. They don't have to try to like get you to put more stuff in their cart because they know you're going to come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Well, I don't
copying
know. I
Amazon
would
isn't always the best thing.
let me push back on that in a slightly
Okay.
interesting way. They don't build a warm and fuzzy relationship. But what they have done is they've built a highly credible, trusted relationship that I'm going to get my stuff on time. They're
They
going to
know I'm
have
going to get it fast.
it's
going to be
Bezos's
reasonably
flywheels.
priced. Yep.
Yeah, good price. Like he says, a vast selection, good price, fast delivery. And that's just like anyone. Like I give this example to new hires all the time. I go, communication builds trust. I go, let me give you an example. You have two friends. One friend, whenever you text them, within 5 to 10 minutes, they always get back to you. Even if they're busy, they say, I'm busy, give me an hour.
Yeah.
Then you have another friend who may be more gregarious and whatever, but like sometimes gets back to you in a second and sometimes takes a day. You don't know, right? They're like, yeah, I have this. Your house is on fire. Who are you texting?
Right.
Right. And there's no question about that. And so I think Amazon is the friend that always gets back to you.
The
gets
reliable friend.
And that's the trust they've built. And so I think in that sense, I agree with you on the like optimization or the kitschy, cute stuff.
Yeah. Or their emails are terrible because they don't want them scraped. Yeah.
It looks so old. I mean, the whole process is real rough, but yeah, they've got that advantage position. But by the way, again, that's not a defensible business.
Yeah, like
at
have
all.
you ever put a credit card in Amazon? Like it's a terrible experience. It's so bad.
Terrible.
Like there's like it's got to be in the bottom like 30% of e-commerce sites, but it doesn't matter because everyone will just like do it. They don't have to optimize it.
Yeah, not at this point. I mean, have you ever calculated your own LTV for Amazon?
I for a while before Amazon was charging sales tax, I was paying my sales tax. It was like, I don't know, for some reason my accountant said you had to pay your sales tax when I was in California. So every year I had to add up all my dollars that I spent on Amazon. And then we calculated whatever the 8 point something percent sales tax. And I don't know where even I sent it to. And it was a lot of money. It was a lot more than I would have expected.
I think my family spends $30,000 a year on Amazon.
Yeah, I would not be surprised.
And so that means if you just assume they have a 30% margin, like that means $10,000 a year is my lifetime value for them.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
I was like, what else
and that's
is it
probably going up too.
Yeah, Apple. Like I was like, there's a few companies where I'm like, oh, like what is my lifetime value at this company? It's nuts.
Yep, it's insane. Okay, well now you're running a venture studio. What's the kind of process for choosing ideas to like actually spend your time on? Because your time is, I imagine, the most valuable thing.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about, I spent a fair bit of time, I know Jack Abraham's a friend from college who runs Atomic, and Brett Shaheen's a friend from college who runs Redesign. And, this model has, this and I know this, like a spotty past at best. And it's sort of every founder's dream. Okay, I want to like start the companies, but not run them.
Every founder wants to run a quote unquote incubator.
Yeah. And, I started to think about, there was couple levers for me. One was what's true for me, what really lights me up and gets me excited. What's my why? What's going to keep me energized consistently? And then what are some of the challenges and what do I think is my version of overcoming those? And especially where those two things overlapped is sort of how I built the studio. So there's at least 3 unique things that we do. The first one is the companies are all what I'd call capital light, long-term growth businesses, may or may not be venture scale. Like venture scale is not a criteria for us. It's like, can we get this thing profitable and on its own fast to be able to grow for a long time? And so it's okay. Us building $10, $50 million revenue businesses would be totally fine.
Yep.
That would be great. Right. So that's number one. Number 2 is they all leverage one of my unfair advantages, that I've cultivated over a decade plus as an entrepreneur. So that could mean a lot of it is like the brand we launched, who launches a brand in this day and age on Facebook? And meanwhile, we've been able to scale it profitably for almost most of its life. Like, well, because I've been buying Facebook ads for decades, I know how to do it.
You're good at
it.
Yep.
So that has to leverage, or selling problems that brands and marketers have. We launched this talent marketplace growth assistant, and it's gotten to 10 million in sales in 2 years. And that's because like I already had the audience, and I had, I knew the problems they had, and I could quickly solve them. So that has to leverage my advantage. And then the third one is it has sort of for Jesse's culture, and in some ways it operates a little bit more like a holding company than a studio. What I mean by that is like I meet every CEO every week.
Yep.
When we founded the companies, I behaved like a co-founder, not like a guy or gal sitting over there saying, "Here's your money, here's your idea, update me in a month." Which we're not going to try to microwave the companies. And so the hardest part
So what does a microwave company mean?
I think a lot of the studios go out there, they have a list of ideas, they recruit CEOs to run them, they give the CEO 15% or whatever, and they give them the idea and they give them the money and they say, go build it.
Yeah.
And then here's some resources and whatever. And I think that is a very challenging model, or can be a challenging model. I think I'm spending at least the first year pretty heavily involved in any new venture that we're getting on, so that there's a lot of osmosis that goes on between me and that person. And the hard part of where this falls apart usually for any holding company or studio is the talent. The talent is by far the hardest part. And so
recruiting is the number one challenge for a venture studio, right?
Yeah, I say talent because of my answer to the question, which is yes, recruiting is hard, but it's impossible to hire a first-rate CEO who's going to take 30% of a company and who knows what they're doing and who doesn't need. Why would they ever use you?
Yep.
And I love meeting founders who go, I don't need what you're doing, Jesse. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Good for you.
Great.
Right. But there's a group of people out there that I think do want that structure.
Yep.
But they need a lot of development. And so we're going to go slower. We are going slower. I spend a lot of time.
You got to spend time growing them.
Growing that person the way I would grow any member on my team. The CEO of the brand, she, we're doing all this funny stuff with cash flow to keep the thing lean. And, she'd never built a 3-week or 4-week cash flow forecast, and it's like, well, if I just wasn't engaging with her, she would be in trouble, the business would be in trouble, or we'd have to put money into it, or, so hold on, we're going to just spend an hour doing a Google Doc together. This is how this is the borrowing we're doing. Make sure the line doesn't get bigger than the line we have, like things you and I have done in our career. Now she's a maven at it. Now she's like, she finds stuff I don't find.
That's a completely learnable skill.
Exactly.
You just have to have someone to show it to.
So I think there's a ton of people out there who want to be founders. By the way, she started a company. She raised venture money. It didn't work out. She grinded on it for 4 years. And she sits there going, man, this is so different for me, Jesse. Like I have a person who I can ask things to. We create an environment that's not judgmental, that's really around growth and learning, which also, by the way, is a thing that lights me up and is a passion of mine.
Now, why does that have to be a separate company with a separate cap table? Like, couldn't it be part of a bigger, like a holding company, and then you hire this person as kind of the GM? Do you think it has to be a separate company because you have a different capital stack, or you have to give them like a real share in the business?
Yeah, it's what you just said. So I started at calling everyone GM and saying, we're going to start this business. And what I found was that person does need direct economics in the thing that they're working on, which you could do with some weird vehicles.
Yep.
Between me and Gateway X, we own the majority of every company anyway. And then they own a very sizable stake, right? A stake that when things are working is more than enough for anyone.
Yep.
Think of it this way. Like if me, Nick, and Chris started Ampush, we owned 33% on day one each. And we never raised money, but we had an options pool and all this stuff. Like they can get as good of economics as that, essentially, or close to that.
So how does it, is it just, sorry to go into super weeds, but is it just like, are these things like a traditional C Corp and then Gateway X is a part of the cap table? Is Gateway X structure as a fund so you can pass it through economically from like a tax perspective? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. They're with the exception of one, they're all LLCs. I think if we decide to raise venture into one, we make it a C Corp. Gateway X is an LLC. It's a holding company. And so the balance sheet, it has cash on its balance sheet. We put it in, the cash can get recycled across the different companies. I can take cash out for myself if I need to or want to.
Well, how does the cash get recycled through the different companies?
Well, because so Gateway X at formation owns basically Gateway X owns half and Jesse Pujji owns half of every company at formation.
Okay.
And then I can basically give some of my share to the CEO. Or any other team members to get the business off the ground. And so then a typical cap table will say Gateway owns 50%, Jesse owns 20%, and then founding team owns 30%. We're making that up, right?
Yep.
And then, like Growth Assistant is a good example. It generates a ton of cash. It's a very cash
So basically, you're
generative
taking
business.
dividends in a way.
Gateway does, and then Gateway can. What do I want to do with that? Do I want to distribute it out to myself? Do I want to push it into? We're going to launch a new brand, launch a new business, and yeah, and it just flows that way. One thing I'm thinking about, like some people have said that Gateway should be a C corp because there's a bunch of tax reasons for that might be the case. I think I probably have to get it to a certain level, or there has to be a certain amount of dollars involved before that makes sense. But that might be one change we make because you can avoid some taxation things there.
And what happens if one of these D2C brands? So yeah, if Gateway was a C corp, and one of these D2C brands sells, then just like Gateway pays the tax on it.
It's all passing through to me, so it's really me paying the tax. But like, when we ran Ampush as an example, like Ampush paid my taxes on behalf, paid my tax bill on behalf of me, which is just no different than a corporation paying taxes if you think about it. Depending on the rates and some differentials and all these other things, that's how it ends up playing out. So I didn't get all the cash. If Ampush generated 7 million EBITDA in a year, I didn't get my 100% of that at the time but they still covered my tax bill. 2.1 million would go out, or 2.5 million to pay the tax bill. And then I had this basis in the company, and then sort of how it played out. But yeah, that's how we structured it. One thing I promised myself, and I've already done many times, is like, I know spiritually how I want to spend my time and what I want to do. And I'm going to be very open to how the format evolves. Because I think sometimes people get too stuck in formats.
Yeah, in a particular format.
And I'm like, we may raise money. We may sell one of these things, and we'll have a bunch of money at the top co, and maybe we push that out. Maybe it gets put into something new. Like,
because you can imagine even taking investors in Gateway X in the top co.
Sure. Totally.
And
the one thing I can't get wrong is developing talent and people. That is the thing.
You just want to focus on that. Don't worry about the structure.
Yeah. Because you can ebb and flow anything with a good, reasonably candid conversation, and when it makes sense for everyone.
And if you think about Atomic, like in some ways they're very different from you. You're focused on capital light. One of their real great advantages is they can raise a ton of money.
Yeah.
So they're really focused on something that can be like that raises a lot of money.
And here's a fun fact: Jack is an investor in like at the top co of Gateway X. I have a few people, and I've invested in Atomic. So it's
amazing. Okay,
we both have tons of respect and love for how the other guy does it.
But you mentioned like a redesign. Okay, well, they're really focused on this kind of like healthcare niche or something. You guys have kind of a D2C kind of niche that you're out there. In some ways, it's a little bit easier to create other companies if you've got some sort of niche that you're focused on.
I agree. Yeah, I think you have to have some unfair advantage, you know. And I think, and in some ways, Jackson. I mean, he's capital is one unfair advantage. He's amazing at raising money and getting the companies to raise money. I think the scale he has is a bit of an unfair advantage. So our unfair advantage is we understand digital marketing better than 95% of people out there, and in a way that's rigorous and all these other things. And so how do we keep replicating that in the world? And I think redesign focuses a lot on healthcare. And I think having some thread that gives you an unfair advantage really, really matters to make these things work. But I also, it's going to be fun to see how they all evolve in the next 10 years. And I think some will be just one big company will take the whole thing over, which is the more common thing that happens. It's funny. I ran one of the companies for a hot second, and it was a really good lesson for me because I was like, I don't want to do this again. Like Bezos has this quote of like, he loved kindergarten, but he doesn't want to go back to kindergarten. And that's kind of how I felt. And I feel like I did it. I did it for a long time. I love helping people learn it and figure it out. I also realized that I'm much more inspired and inspiring when I'm helping a person navigate the challenges of entrepreneurship than when I'm specifically focusing on some business issue. Does that make sense?
You have seen, I mean, there's kind of like two reasons these venture studios fail. One is that they never have any good companies. That's probably the most common one.
Right.
But the second most common one is they have just one incredible company, and then are focusing all of it like it's Uber or it's Groupon or something like that. And then they end up basically focusing all their effort on that company. That could happen, right?
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'm open. I think it's unlikely in my case only because, but it could. Like I want to make sure that the way I got here was not as like strategic. It was very spiritual. Like I spent a lot of time working with a coach, Dave Cashin, who you may know. He's a great coach.
Of course. Yeah. Amazing guy. Yeah.
And, we worked for years to like, what's my why? And the concept of the why and sort of what is the thing. Like, I love, he said it to me when he was like, the thing you can't not do. And for me, it's like, I love that. I love the ideation process and kind of bringing something to life. I love coaching and teaching people. I love sort of the pieces of that early stage of getting the thing going and envisioning it and then bringing it into the world. And, where I was like not doing that at Ampush other times was when it just got to the point where you don't have the ability to do that. Now, maybe you could, if you're Uber, obviously they did that. They launched Uber Eats and they launched Uber this and Uber that. Like,
Yeah.
So there's versions of it, but in my mind, it's something that I just don't think I want. Like the operations of a company, I have a ton of respect for the integrator persona or whatever in EOS. I think it's frankly the most important persona, but it's not me. And it's like, as I go through building some of these things, I go, yeah, it's just tough for me to imagine myself back there.
Do you ask people what is their why?
I do. Yeah.
And do you have people?
Most people don't know.
Yeah, I would assume.
I mean,
that would be a weird interview question. Like, I'll get back to you in a few
Sometimes
weeks.
I say, what's the one thing you can't not do? But my why, I say my why is to help other people learn and grow to be the best versions of themselves through using entrepreneurship as sort of the canvas that I can use. It's my vehicle
I
for
assume
teaching.
That's the case today. Like maybe 5 years ago, that wasn't your why or something, right?
I don't think I knew what it was. Yeah. And it could change for sure.
Interesting. What else? Like now that you kind of recently started a venture studio, I'm sure there's lots of people, as you mentioned. Seems like a common thing that people wish they want to do at some point. What are some of the non-obvious lessons that you've learned?
Most of them have been the obvious ones I tried to shirk, like the GM CEO thing. I tried that and it didn't work. Yeah, I mean, I think like. Well, yeah, I'll share one. You were asking me earlier how I come up with the ideas and how we prioritize. One non-obvious one is like, I have a ton of ideas, as I'm sure you do, right? And so I have just a ton of what I think could be great business ideas. Then I have a different layer, which is like, well, hold on. These are things that not only are good ideas, but I have an unfair advantage in them. And I have a farm, like just imagine a field and a farm of them growing, and I'll talk to people about them and I'll think about them. And then I build relationships with all kinds of people, many of whom say, I want to be a CEO or a founder. And I go, oh, that's really cool. And what I've found is like, I do not recruit for CEOs, not in the traditional context. I build relationships. I share my ideas pretty freely. I get open to working with people on them. But what I've found is that you have to cultivate a very fertile ground on both sides of that. And then at certain times, certain things will pop up and opportunities will show themselves. Right. I think the other thing is you have to pay a lot of attention to what the unfair advantages of the person who becomes a CEO. So let me actually
that kind of like founder market fit type of thing.
Totally, because I have it, but the other person has to have it too, right? And so I'll give you a recent case study as a specific example. So, one way that I source ideas is like people call me and ask me for something that doesn't exist, right? And so I have a friend, without fail, a different friend every month from I went to college with, who works in private equity, calls me and says, I'm about to buy a business for $500 million, Jesse. And I looked at their P&L and a third of it is going to digital marketing. I don't understand it. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Could it be better? Could it be worse? And that has happened to me for the last 5 or 6 years, once a month without fail. And, historically I'm like, well, here's 10 questions you should ask that person, here's some things you should look at. And then, another friend of mine is like, well, it's crazy, Jesse, this doesn't exist. Like, why isn't this a business? You should totally start this as a business. And that you may know this, but McKinsey and Bain each have roughly $1 billion businesses that do private equity due diligence that go and help these guys. And just to do the math on those, the projects average about $1 million a project, which means they're only doing 1,000 projects a year. Which is like, whatever, 80 projects a month, right? And if I talked to a bunch of people, they said McKinsey and Bain don't get marketing. It's a little too, they like more esoteric things. They don't want to, but the agencies don't know how to look at this either, Jesse. And so I had this list of like tech-enabled, due diligence consultancy for private equity. And it's just sitting on my list. It's been on my list for years, right? As a thing, probably even when I was running Ampush, it was on my list. And there's a woman here in town, her and I became friends 4 years ago. She built kind of somewhat of an adjacent business to Ampush, a lot of digital marketing, a lot of content stuff. And every year, I'd say we should start something together. We should, at some point. And, finally about 6 or 8 months ago, she kind of sold her company or sold the thing she was running. She's never founded a company. She's been a very successful CEO. And, I said, what do you think about this? And she's just like, her eyes lit up and she goes, I did a ton of M&A in my first day of my job. She's like, I'm the detective person. I'm the person who finds data nobody else can find. Like, she just got really excited about it. And I said,
that's awesome.
Then I said, let's go work on it. And by the way, I've done this with 15, 20 people. Let's go work on it. Hey, I think the first thing we should do is here's 3 people. Let's have a call and like come back with some takeaways. And honestly, 70-80% of the people are really looking for a job and they don't do it. They don't even follow up.
Yep.
And then of the, more than half of the people who do it, they come back and they show me something. And I'm like, I don't think you're going to be, good at this. She goes like, she takes these calls with PE people, comes back with insights. She goes, here's the thing we need to build, Jesse. Let's go build this. And so it's actually the reason we just launched a business called Aux Insights. And it's exactly what I described. It's that business. And these guys will happily pay,
it's amazing because like also these private equity firms, I've been working with a few in the last few years, and their tech due diligence is terrible. Like they bring in these people who are like CIOs of companies. The last time they wrote code was like 1994 or something. Smart people, but they're used to these huge organizations, and then they're trying to understand some sort of like newer paradigm of how to write code. And they can't even ask the right questions.
Yeah, totally.
It's somewhat embarrassing when you're on the call with them, but like that's who they're bringing in today to do some.
It's
of
a
these
great
diligence.
category. I mean, one of my mentors, my first boss at McKinsey, he's like, I love this category for you, Jesse. Like alternative asset management. They will pay high margins. There are not a lot of high quality people and entrepreneurs kind of on the ops and services and software side, and you can build some really meaningful businesses there. And I think this business is going to be the biggest one we've launched so far.
I mean, this is a services business, so which is kind of different. It's like it's not D2C in a way, right? It's not, you're not getting these customers from Facebook ads and stuff.
Yeah.
Like
a lot of the targets we're diligencing though fit in that, that category.
Yeah. But are there, do you think there's like a good venture studio model to build services businesses?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we're going to prove out part of it through some of the businesses because we're not, I mean, we sort of say D2C, but we also, it's sort of includes software and services and brand, like we'll build all of them. And what we started so far is one in each category, essentially. But yeah, I think services, I mean, in some ways it's easier, right? I think you can get revenue and profits from day one. As I've gotten more into Twitter, I started my career in consulting and I think just learned so much from those 2 years of watching how they did it.
Yeah.
And I think most people who have never been through that, like the classic example of services businesses, like the founder just takes on too much. They don't know how to get it off their plate. They don't know how to get, it's easy to make software do the same thing over and over again. It's really hard to make people do the same thing over and over again.
In services, part of the problem is like the person making the product is also the person selling the product. Whereas in software, they're always two different things.
Yeah. And I think the other big thing is, and this actually was a thing I realized when we launched the software business. When a software business, if you get it right, it does the thing over and over again and you're fine. If you get it wrong though, it's so like, it doesn't matter how off it is. Whereas, at Ampush, like we didn't have to be so specific because I would put really bright people that would go figure out, oh, you're Uber and you want to get drivers. Yeah. Like my really smart person can figure that out. Oh, you're Clash of Clans and you want to get more installs for your game. Like, okay, my really smart person can figure that out. And so there are it was interesting. Selling services is much easier actually in my experience.
Absolutely. It's very much easier. Now you've recently grown your Twitter following massively, and I've known you for a long time. And then all of a sudden, you just show up on Twitter with 2 followers, and then in a couple of years, you're one of the more followed accounts. Like, how did you do that? What's the secret?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think.
I mean, you might not want to tell. Like,
no. I have a whole email
here.
I send to everyone, right? I mean, I think what I tell people first is like be authentic and engage. Like I'll give you the playbook. It's like when you have 2 followers, like just start engaging, write comments on threads that are thoughtful. Again, use your unfair advantages, be authentic with what you know, and get to like 1,000 followers that way by just commenting. And you don't even have to necessarily send tweets at that point.
Yep.
Then you can start sending certain things out, but you have to have like real engagement from people who have been talking to you, like DMs. A lot of people DM, and that's kind of what I did. And then I started like, kind of funny, like the stories I tell at cocktail parties or at dinners that I know people love. Like there's all the like, this when we first started Ampush, how nothing worked in the beginning or whatever. Like, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna write those down the way I literally tell them at this, at these dinners, and all of a sudden they started going viral, and like some of the most viral things. It's funny how it all works, because something that I would spend a lot of time writing, most of the stuff that went viral would be stuff that literally flowed out of my body. Like it took me 20 minutes to write it down, because I've either said it so many times and told people stories. I think my most viral thread is how the Facebook pixel works and how people think the Facebook pixel is listening to them. And I wrote it in Mexico on a family vacation while I was waiting in line to sign up to go like kayaking or something. It was like a really long line at one of these big resorts. And I was like, people always think it's listening, and they're wrong. They don't actually understand how it works.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the most viral. We wrote this thread about Growth Assistant that went super viral, and we've used it many times to kind of go. So it was obviously the threads and writing content. Now today, I don't think threads work anymore. Honestly, like I feel like Twitter has changed a lot.
Yeah.
But I think like good storytelling, good content really, really goes a long way. I was just in Turkey last week, and I read Creativity Inc. while on that trip. And it like, whatever little I know about storytelling and reading that book, I was like, it's about Pixar.
Yeah.
Like, man, it blew my mind. Like
amazing.
The story, like, but I think storytelling and being able to do it, but that was kind of how I did it. And I always tell people spiritually, again, like I want to help other people learn and grow through entrepreneurship. So if I could share what I know and that does it, and then, you probably know this, you start getting all these pings from people saying, thank you for writing that. It really helped me. And that's like fills my cup, really and nice. I get excited and I'm like, oh, I want to do it again. And then commercially, like it gets leads to the businesses. Like I've hired some of the best people through it. I've gotten some deal flow in different ways through it. So then like commercially it makes total sense. And so it's been a fun ride. I mean, it's super fun ride.
Now you grew up in St. Louis, and now you live in St. Louis. Tell us like something about, and as you know, I recently was there and I just loved it. Tell us something maybe people wouldn't appreciate about the city.
Oh man. I think it's, I mean, there's so many things I could tell you. I think it's got to have one of the best. Here's a good one actually for you with the data stuff. Maybe you can look this up in your data. I think it's probably got the best distance from like people's homes to highway access in the country.
Interesting.
And what I mean by that is like, if you came to my house right now and you looked around, you go, wow, you seem really far away from a highway, Jesse. There's trees, it's green, I don't hear any noise. And you could be on a major highway within 3 minutes.
Yep.
And I just have never been to a city that has this level of like, I'll contrast it with an example of Philadelphia, where I went to college. Like, man, you could take 95, but if you live on the main line, you're going on Lancaster Avenue. I mean, it is hard to get to the highway from the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It's just a difficult thing to do. It takes 20 minutes to get in. California is like that in my experience. Not everywhere, obviously on the 101 and the peninsula is great, but so I think that's something really unique. And I think I'll just to roll with the analogy, like everything is convenient and easy as a result of that. It's easy to get anywhere. I think that means a lot of people are super nice and super friendly. And, we know all of our neighbors, like all the kind of classic Midwest things. But I don't know. It's another good one that people don't know is it's at the turn of the century, last century, it was the 4th largest city in the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's a big city. Like it was designed, like some people say one of the things that make it great is it was designed for like double the amount of people that are here. So there's just space everywhere.
I mean, I found it just absolutely beautiful too. So I think it's incredibly underrated.
Yeah. The arch, by the way, is incredibly like everyone goes, oh, arch, whatever. And then they walk up to it and it's
amazing. Yeah. It's huge. Yeah.
It's huge. People don't realize.
Now, one question we like to ask, what's one conspiracy theory that you believe?
Oh man, what is a conspiracy theory I believe? Have you seen that 13th on Netflix?
No.
It's like about the 13th Amendment.
Okay. No, I haven't seen it. Okay.
Which is like the abolishing slavery.
Yeah.
Except for in servitude. I don't want to get too political, whatever, but like, I very much believe that like Nixon or whoever, like there was a very clear mandate against African Americans that was governmental and structural to like hurt that community back
like
in
a
the day.
redlining type of thing, or
like the crack epidemic being caused, by structural governmental policies. And it was not
it's not an accident. It's like it was introduced by
yeah, there's a famous example of the Southern strategy for how, the South used to be completely Democrat.
Yeah.
Now it's obviously completely Republican. And that was a Republican.
Except for Georgia.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But that was a completely Republican driven Southern strategy to basically like push racism out into the country. And the more I've like read about it, and I mean, I'm not an expert and I don't want to debate anybody about it, but what I've seen about it makes me go, wow, that does not seem like an accident.
Okay, I like it. Okay, this is a good. I love conspiracy theories. So, and I love hearing ones that I don't believe too. Like I just always find them super fascinating. Okay, last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
What conventional wisdom? What I should have a good answer to this. Question. I'm trying to think what's like a good one. I hear other one that I've had an interesting relationship. Well, I think deferred gratification is overdone.
Okay.
I think the conventional wisdom of, and by the way,
marshmallow test type of thing.
Yeah, I think the marshmallow test is a strange recipe to make us unhappy. And I think it's like my dogma, or like the dogma associated with it, is a false dichotomy.
Okay.
I think you can enjoy your life tremendously and also be good at school or whatever other thing. Like you can, the idea that you have to defer gratification to be successful later, I think it's just a false dichotomy. And I think it comes from like a very old school way of thinking, and like you gotta, sacrifice, like, and you hear it with academics, like you hear it with kids, kids are gonna be tough. No, like you can enjoy your kids, you can enjoy building a company, you can enjoy like, and I think it's bullshit. I think it's and you're talking to someone.
But there's not everything you do you enjoy though, right? Or super enjoy. I mean, I like lift weights. I don't really like it. Honestly, I don't really like it at all. But like, I don't know, somehow people have convinced me it's good for me, so I go do it because I want to be more active when I'm older or something. Yeah. So there are some things that you're doing.
Yeah, but is that that's not deferring or gratifying? I mean, you get to enjoy the benefits of that the next day or even the next hour after you lift. You feel good. You feel the endorphins.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like a straight, like people like, don't go party so that you can study and then later on you'll be rich. Like it just, I think you can enjoy things in real time. Like I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying you don't do hard work. I'm not saying you don't do things that are challenging or difficult, or maybe you don't even enjoy them. But the idea that you have to like broadly defer gratification, like that's the way it comes across, right? Yep. It's like, oh, don't make the dumb choice to go out late at night, study instead. Right. And then what ends up happening is because of that, I think I was one of these kids who my best friends were on the football team, even though I was an honors kid with like number 3 in my class. Right. And what you end up seeing is like, well, I have to either be the party kid and I'm the live by the day, whatever. Right. Yeah. And I don't care about my grades because I'm just, or I'm the nerd and I don't do either of those things because I have to defer gratification. I can't go, if I go party one night, and I think there's like, it's a classic example where like, I think you can have both of those things. Again, you may not in 1 minute to the next, you may have to skip a thing to study for your exam. Sure. But it doesn't mean you have to like.
One of the interesting things about people who defer gratification is they go do something that they're basically often doing something to like get their ticket punched somewhere. And so then they think by doing that, okay, I don't really like this thing that I'm going to go do. Maybe let's say it's law school.
Yeah.
I don't really like law school per se. I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't really want to be, I don't feel passionate about the law or anything, but I know it's like setting me up for something. And often like they think they're optimizing for the long term, but really they're optimizing for the midterm.
Big time.
And so they're kind of like sacrificing the short term for the midterm, but actually often isn't necessarily in their best interest long term. So it's kind of like a N curve or something.
Yeah, maybe my contrarian thing, that just to put a finer point on it, is the advice to defer gratification is more damaging than it is helpful to the world. Maybe that's the specific thing I would say, because you got all these people go to law school and go, what the hell am I doing here? I didn't even want to practice. I mean,
yeah,
like
if you go because you're passionate about the law, like you care deeply about it, that's great.
Yeah, like what would I tell my kids?
I don't want to tell my kids optionality thing.
Do things you don't like so that later on in life you can be better at something. Like, no, I'd say work hard at the things that, whatever, that bring you joy, that you want to do. Be excellent. Absolutely be excellent, right? And so I just find it, and here's the other thing, and you know this, Auren, you and I both know it because we both experienced it, I'm sure. You have a big exit, you've been taught a certain thing a certain way, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is weird. What do I do? Like, so many people go through this challenge of, it's not like if for 20 years you've deferred gratification, people think they can just flip a switch and like start making it rain and buying private planes. Like, no, the reality is people struggle a lot with having to enjoy those things because they oriented a certain way for so long. And so I think it's another example of how that philosophy can be more hurtful than helpful.
Now, when I was in high school, I wasn't going to those parties, but that's because I wasn't being invited to them. I was mainly playing like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. So, but actually, Dungeons and Dragons is actually super fun. So
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, were you enjoying it, right? Or
yeah,
were you
I
like,
had a lot of fun playing.
I need to not have gratification because I need to go do something else, right?
Exactly. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you, Jesse Pujji, for joining us at World of DaaS. I follow you at JS Pujji on Twitter, and I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun.
All right. Next time in St. Louis or Virginia.